my lightning talk. It's a little bit of a fat lightning talk, I'm afraid. It got a bit, ran away with me. So I'm going to rattle through it at a bit of a pace, so strap in. The idea here really was, I'm not expecting you to know what TypeScript is necessarily, other than it's a way that you can add annotations like type hints to your JavaScript in a way that we can do that in PHP. So it does add a bit of overhead. There's a bit of a curve to learning TypeScript. So you don't want to use it for any project. And I think this is where some of the controversy that we were talking about came from. So in the instance with DHH, they took it out of a library where they decided it wasn't really benefiting their users and they weren't enjoying developing with it. So the overhead wasn't worth the trade-off. But sometimes it is. And so for those times, I want to talk about how you can transform your PHP types into its TypeScript types using TypeScript Transformer. So let me start this, which I should have done already, and pick up the clicker. All right, go. Clicker, click. The bottom one. Yeah, no, it's not. It's down to go forwards. Okay, fine. Hey, I'm Joby. I'm an independent full stack engineering consultant. I work through my own company, Full Stack App Co. What does that all mean? So I work with one or more clients at any particular time, and I help them to deliver web-based applications. I'm usually working with Laravel-based stack. And I also help them to understand the software development lifecycle if they are not traditionally a software-based company. Yeah. So the reason I started using TypeScript with my Laravel projects was that about 12 months ago, I started working with a client on a project which is based around, which is heavily JavaScript based. So we're using, the stack that we're using is Laravel, Inertia, and React. Now, if you're not sure what Laravel is, it's a PHP based MVC framework. I'm sure you know what React is. If you're not sure what Inertia is, it's a library which kind of provides a glue between your backend application, so in this instance, Laravel, and your JavaScript, when you've got a JavaScript UI that's reactive. So that could be React, it could be Vue, it could be Svelte. And you can actually use Inertia with Ruby on Rails now, and Django, Nigel, you are a Pythonista. So yeah, that's all pretty good. But the application in question, we are working heavily with data objects. So the application is for a client who have a statistical modeling team, and they're building an API that's going to be consumed by the application that does statistical analysis and sends large data objects back to the front end to be rendered in D3, in interactive plots, and in tables and things like that. So in this instance, I was kind of concerned about all these great big objects that were flying around the front end of the heavily JavaScript application. Yeah, so POJO hell really is what I was concerned about. So what's a POJO? It's a plain old JavaScript object. So think, well, this is an example of it at the bottom. Think, you know, JSON. And the trouble is when you've got quite complicated data objects that are being represented in your database that you're then injecting into templates which are coming to the front end, or you're sending that data to your JavaScript-based front end via AJAX endpoints, it can be difficult to kind of manage and understand the shape of those objects and also get sensible error checking within your IDE, because your IDE can't really tell what the things are. Excuse me. So in this example down at the bottom, this is an example of a POJO. So obviously, well, hopefully you can tell what's being represented here, but it'd be kind of nicer if we could have a type so that we actually get checking. If we don't have that, it's all a bit ambiguous. So that was really my primary concern and why I started using TypeScript in this project. So one of the things that I really didn't like, which is what this talk is about, was maintaining glue types within TypeScript. So when you have objects coming from your back end that are being represented in your front end, so maybe from a PHP-based back end where you've got models coming out of your database and you're sending those to the front end, you need to manually create types within TypeScript to tell TypeScript that those objects are coming and what they are in order for it to do a type check. And it's kind of nuts when you start having tens of different objects being represented and you're manually maintaining these types yourself, because you're going to update your backend code and then you're going to forget to update your front end code, you'll get bugs, and it'll just hang you up for a little bit of time. But when that keeps happening over and over again, it's, you know, death of a thousand cuts. So is there something we can do about it? I'm just going to have a drink. That's what I'm going to do about it. So I had a look into it and I found an excellent package, surprise, surprise, by Spartsy. Now, if you're not in the PHP world, you probably won't have heard of them, but they're a Belgian agency. They're really proactive and involved in the Laravel community, and they produce lots of really high quality packages that are well supported and well maintained. So Spartsy have a package called TypeScript Transformer, which you can use in PHP projects, in any PHP project, and you can install it like that at the top. The caveat is that you need to roll your own command line to run it. I'll get to that in a second. It's not actually all that difficult according to their docs. If you're using it with Laravel, then you can install the Laravel TypeScript Transformer, and it's basically the same package, but it's a wrapper, so that if you are from Laravel world, it will automatically you'll automatically have a command line tool to run it via Artisan, and you'll be able to publish config, and it'll have some sensible defaults based on Laravel projects. If you are trying it out in Laravel, I really recommend you also install Laravel Data. So it's another package by Spartsy, and they're designed to work together. So I don't have time to go into that, but that's a really neat package to use in combination with TypeScript Transformer for Laravel. So there we go. When you want to run it, we'll get to this, but you know, some script that you've created is how you're going to run it if you've installed the vanilla PHP version, and you'll get PHP Artisan TypeScript Transform if you're using it through Laravel. So here we have an example for the non-Laravel project. It's actually pretty straightforward. So this is from the Spartsy documents, docs, and you can see on line 8, effectively what we do is we give TypeScript Transformer a directory where we want it to search for types that we're going to ask it to transform. There's a bunch of transformers in the middle, and then we tell it, okay, well, stick it in this file at the end, and all of the types go into one file. Now, if you're not familiar with TypeScript, the d.ts file type means that it is a type definition file. So there's two file types in TypeScript. You've got TS files and d.ts. So TS files are where you can have logic and all your normal kind of values and you know, functions. You can also include types in line in there. But d.ts files are for types only. And the reason that that's a kind of a way to do it is so that you can add types for projects where you don't have access to the source code already, and you can kind of tell it about the types in the project. But this is just how TypeScript Transformer does it. So yeah, just be aware of that. None of the types, by the way, in TypeScript get included in your bundle JavaScript. They will get stripped out. Okay, this is if you're from Laravel land, you'll understand that how to publish config files. This is a config file. Usually the only thing I change is the location of the generated output, just because they stick it in a types directory, and the only thing in that types directory is the type file, which I don't like. So I usually put it in with my JavaScript or TypeScript. Top tip: now that you've got TypeScript Transformer installed and you know how to run it by the command line, I would set up a file watcher, because so whatever your IDE is, you should be able to set one up and just tell it to watch the directories where your TypeScript, where your PHP classes that you want to transform live, that you've just configured in TypeScript Transformer. And when it notices that you've changed them, it's going to run the command line and generate them for you, because otherwise, guess what? You're going to forget to do it. Whew. Right, okay. I told you it's going to go rattle through this at a rate. Let's have a basic example. So let's imagine that we've got a data object that represents a user. This is Laravel, but it doesn't have to be. The important thing that you need to know is We're in a data directory. You can see on the left, it's a data user. And that's where we've told TypeScript Transformer to look for types to transform to TypeScript. So we've created this user DTO as a kind of filtered version, maybe of a user model in the database that we're going to send to the front end. And you can see here we've got a few scalar values. We've got some strings, an integer, and a Boolean. So how do we tell TypeScript Transformer that we want it to transform this class? Well, it's super easy. All you need to do is to stick an attribute on at the class level, and TypeScript Transformer will notice that you've changed the file because you set up your file watcher. Oh yeah, TypeScript, yay. And it's going to generate this in your output file. So this is the TypeScript that has been generated automatically from your PHP DTO. You can see that we've got some types which correspond to the PHP types, type hinting that we had. The main difference is that there's a number for age because JavaScript doesn't really it doesn't discern between floats and integers. Everything is a number. So whether you have a float or an int, it's going to end up being a number in your TypeScript types. Now, that's kind of a good start. But one of the things I like to do with my DTOs is to add data to the end of the class, because it kind of gets in a muddle when you've got lots of things with the same class name. For example, where we've got a data object called user, we've probably also got a database like an ORM class that represents a record in our database for our users, which is also called user. So I prefer to call my data object user data so that it's easy for me to search for it. But the thing is, I don't want my TypeScript type to be called user data because there's only one user type in my generated TypeScript, and it's a bit naff for it to be called user data. I just want it to be called user. So how can we do that? Thankfully, you can pass in a string literal into the TypeScript attribute that you've stuck on your TypeScript class. And now on line 8, you can see we're calling the class user data. It's going to be easy for me to differentiate between the user model, and TypeScript Transformer is going to do exactly the same thing, which is what we want. So we've got a user object now in TypeScript and a user data object that it kind of maps to. Okay, so now that we've got a type, here's a very quick look at sort of, what you get when you can use your new type in your TypeScript. So we're in an app.ts file here, which is like the entry point TypeScript file in our application. And we're now able to import this user type that we've just generated. And you can see here that because Axios, which is an Ajax library, supports TypeScript, we can start using TypeScript to hint about the types that we're expecting to get back from functions. So here what we're doing is we're saying, okay, Axios, I'm making a GET request to the user's endpoint, and on a successful response, I'm expecting an array of users to come back. And that's cool because when I start iterating through that response data object, so response.data is where the response data lives in Axios. You can see if I start using incorrect properties that don't actually exist on the user type, I'm going to get errors. And that's great because I can fix them right away. I don't have to go and run my code in a browser to see it and then get confused or anything. Yeah, so that's pretty neat. Let's have a fancy example. Right. I don't know about you, but all the applications I work on store the user's favorite hat. And one of the ways I like to do that is using an enum, because we're going to limit the type of hats that they can have as their favorite. So here we've got a backed enum in PHP because it's got string values. And TypeScript Transformer is pretty good because it oh, actually, yeah, we've type hinted our favorite hats, I should say, before we get to that, on my user object in PHP world, and immediately TypeScript Transformer is able to see that we've got an enum, and it's transformed it into a TypeScript type for us. Now, this is the default way that TypeScript Transformer generates, sort of deals with enums, which is to create a type which is a union of a bunch of string literals. So you'll notice there are all the backed values there. There is another way. I'll get to it in the gotchas because it's it's a bit of an interesting case. But you can see here we've now got a type, and it's also referenced that type on line 6. We don't need to use the TypeScript attribute with enums because all enums get transformed automatically. How about nullable types? So if you're a PHP dev, you'll notice that on line 14, we've added a question mark before int, which means that it's either an integer or it's null. And that's supported out of the box. So age now in our TypeScript is going to be number or null. Okay, so this here as well was just to illustrate that with TypeScript Transformer, it always looks at the public properties of your objects. It'll ignore non-public properties. I've been using this constructor promotion, property promotion style of writing my my properties here, but it doesn't matter as long as you've you can have a computed public property, and that will be fine as well. So I'd just like to point out as well, line 24, where it's mapped, the salutation for baseball cap being "Hey dude" is a bit sort of 10-year-old boy. That was actually GitHub Copilot for you, so I don't think we have to worry about the robots chasing us down the street just yet. There you go. So we've got a salutation object. It doesn't matter. It's just public. Okay, so let's just quickly cover how arrays of objects work in TypeScript and PHP TypeScript Transformer. We've got an organization data object here. Yes, I did forget to put data on the end of it in my hurry to put these slides together. But this is the data object where we're going to have a name of an organization and an array of users. TypeScript, yeah. So the problem here is when this gets transformed, because we've just said it's an array with the name of user, TypeScript Transformer is going to create us an array of any, and any is a TypeScript type that just kind of means, like it can match lots of different objects. Now it's useful in certain situations, but it's not actually what we want here because we do want to check that we've got users. So the way that we can deal with that is the same way that we deal with generics in PHP at the moment anyway, and that's just to add a doc block which uses the which notes the generic using the array bracket syntax. And then what we're going to end up with is an array of users, which is perfect. Okay, so final section. Good to knows and gotchas. So these are things that I ran into when I was first starting to use this, and might save you some time not doing the same. tsconfig file. So that's where your TypeScript config lives. Don't forget to add a type roots, which tells TypeScript where your generated type definition file is, right? There are some places where TypeScript looks for type definitions anyway, but in a PHP project, that's probably not going to be where the file is. So just add a type root array and point it at where your generated types are. Otherwise, you're just going to have loads of red squiggles everywhere, and it's a pain. There is an odd dependency on the Laravel package. So if you install that and you run TypeScript Transformer straight away, then you're going to get a message saying that sparsy enum doesn't exist. I don't know why it's not in the package dependencies. Yeah, go figure. Just install sparsy enum and you're good to go. Bear in mind that or at least be aware that the namespacing is kind of old school. So it's not really how you would write, how you do sort of namespacing now. You'd be using like ES module based to prevent ES modules to prevent collisions. TypeScript Transformer sort of does it in this old school global browser object style. I suspect it's for backwards compatibility and so that everything can live in the same file, because otherwise, if things were in lots of different files, they'd have a nightmare trying to resolve all of the different types that are being referenced within the file. Just live with it, it's fine, and just know that the syntaxes might look a bit odd. Oh yeah, TypeScript, native enums, right. So by default, if you remember our hats example, by default, TypeScript transformer transforms enums in PHP to like a union type of string literals. Now, if you want to use TypeScript enums, and this is the config, by the way, the setting at the top that controls that. If you want to use TypeScript enums, then you can set this to true, and you will end up with TypeScript enums that look like this, which are very similar to PHP enums. I actually really like. However, the problem with this is that TypeScript enums are both a type and a value, and the file that you're chucking them into is a type definition file. So my first problem with this was your TypeScript definition file gets chucked away, and then you get your JavaScript blows up because it can't find this actual value. And I thought, hey, I'll fix that by changing the output file to a .ts, and I ended up with a whole bunch of other errors. So I suspect this is why it's off by default, and I would suggest that you just leave it alone. Use enums elsewhere if you want in your own code, but just leave it like that with TypeScript transformer. So the final one. Like any good library, there is a way to, there's an escape hatch. So if you're encountering problems and there's some type that TypeScript transformer is not interpreting in the way that you think it should be, you can use this attribute literal TypeScript type and give it a string literal, which is the literal type that you want it to output. So this is TypeScript here. Now, I would really recommend you don't do this. I had a pickle where I thought I did need to do this, and then I kind of looked at my code and realized I could do it in a different way where I didn't have to do this. And the main reason I would suggest you don't do this is because now that you've written that literal in there, you're losing the power of the automation, and you're going to have to keep that up to date manually yourself if you refactor your code or change anything. So, oh yeah, that's what it looks like. Right, there we go. Yes, if you would like to contact me in long form, if you would like to send me a poem or something, you can contact me at phpsussex@fullstackappcode.com. I'll leave that email open for a couple of weeks. You can contact me on Twitter, but I'm not really on Twitter very often, so I wouldn't, I mean, it's up to you. It's at Joby_H. Thank you very much. Looking forward to talking to you later, and I'm looking forward to your talk. Cheers.
So I take it this is a down on the clicker to move to the next slide. So yeah, a little bit about myself. So obviously I've spoken a little bit about Tempcover. As myself, I'm a self-taught developer. I've been doing development for 10 years roughly. Prior to that, I worked in the games industry as a designer, producer, project manager. So a lot of that kind of product ownership experience. And the two things kind of form quite a nice kind of template for me as a tech lead, because I get to kind of think about product and I get to think about, you know, the technical direction and get involved and get my hand dirty. I've also historically run my own e-commerce business, and yeah, so a little bit less about me, and it's going to talk. So I wanted to kind of, you know, I was asked to do a talk a while back, and you know, I was thinking about continuous personal development, and I was really kind of having a think about what is CPD, what it means to us, and you know, do we just consider CPD, you know, around the time of our annual reviews? Ironically, at the time it was coming up to my annual review, and I was thinking about CPD, and you know, do we always, you know, when we think about CPD, do we just think about the technologies we want to learn, a new package, a new library, you know, these sorts of things, you know, you go online and you look up, you know, what Google thinks about these things, you know, and it's, you know, it's all these kind of things we've just discussed, developing your own projects, your peer programming, you know, mentoring, coaching, and it's all very technology focused. So what I want to do today is kind of bring it back to ourselves a little bit and delve into the topic of, you know, understanding ourselves as a developer and how our developer personality can help us, you know, grow within our teams and, you know, what we do. By seeking to understand ourselves, we can contribute better value to the team. How we're going to do this? Well, I'm not an expert on the topic. I've you know, read more about personality since doing my first version of this talk. Continue to be kind of very interested in this subject, but you know, I'm by no means an expert. But I think it's you know, it's a starting point, and it gets the conversation going. So why is this so important? So I like to look at what we do. We design code, we write clean code, we implement solutions, we embrace solid principles, advanced technologies, but we're ultimately always delivering value. That's the thing that we are doing it. So we are ultimately service providers. But to who? Our customers. So I think this is the interesting thing, is when we talk about customers, we seldom think about all of our customers. We often think, our customers as being our stakeholders. Wrong slide, but no on it. But actually, there's more people in our field of customers. And we forget that our peers are our customers, as well as kind of team leads and teams that we support. So everyone within the team that we interact with is effectively a customer to us. And the better we understand ourselves and the better we understand the other people in the team, we can better kind of understand and broker those customer relationships. So as I kind of mentioned, when we consider our professional development, we often consider our practical skills first. But, I think, professional development is not often the first thing we're thinking about. And how often do we ever consider ourselves when we're considering, professional development? So this is what I'd like to explore. So these are all new opportunities to deliver value. The better we can understand ourselves, we can tell our stakeholders, our team managers, our team members what we need, what are our needs, how can we better interact within our team. I've always found that when I've been able to kind of broker my personality within the organization, they can understand the kind of the limits of where I'm coming from in my communications, what I need, what I want from a situation, and we can kind of explore some of those in more detail. So this is what we're here for. Let's pigeonhole some developers. Don't be a Brent. I don't know, some of you might know that reference. That's a reference from Brent from the Phoenix Project. It's a great book. I suggest and recommend that everyone reads it or listens to it. I particularly recommend the audiobook. It's a very enjoyable audiobook. So the diplomat. So I identified the diplomat in my previous company when I was working. It was a company called STM, it's a pensions company. And the diplomat is an extremely loyal developer, in my view. They valuing continuity, stability, and security, and they're excellent mediators. They're warm communicators, they're everyone's friend, strong team players, and process orientated. The thing about the diplomat is that they like to broker between people. They don't tend to like to step out of the circle of change, and they like to kind of mediate change, to reduce change as much as possible. They favor the status quo, but they are very loyal long-term employees. The lone wolf, so the Brent, basically, they like to work. Oh no, it's not actually the Brent, because I've got the Brent coming up. They like to work independently. They have a strong sense of autonomy. So the lone wolf is someone who likes to kind of go into their own space, do their bit of development, and then come back. And you very often don't get a sense of how long it's going to take them to do that, and you're kind of sitting there with lots of unknowns, and eventually you get this wonderful thing working at the end of it. Sometimes it's not what we quite expected, so you have to be you're mindful of that in the process of working with lone wolves or being a lone wolf. I think the key thing about the lone wolf is if you identify yourself as a lone wolf, you can communicate that to your team, so your managers or your peers don't have this expectation of you to kind of interact on the same level as maybe a diplomat or other members of the team that are in the process. So the logistician, or the doer. So the doer is what I consider to be a safe pair of hands on the team. They are someone who excels with clearly defined tasks. They get things done. They like a very narrow focus on what they're working on, and they seldom ask questions about abstractions of how things work. So, if you give them a library and say, this will solve your problems for you, they will seldom go and look at the source code and work out how that library is doing, or what's making up the magic to make that kind of hang together. These have a good sense of time management, and they understand the boundaries of the tasks that you set them. So when you work with doers, they kind of get jobs done, but they won't necessarily reinvent the wheel. The Brent. the Brent has a deep understanding of the underlying software system. So the Brents are they tend to come your single point of failures. They tend to often become the troubleshooter. They're prone to taking on too much work, and they have a very myopic approach to their workload. So what happens with a Brent sometimes is they get so honed in and focused on solving the problems is they don't zoom out and see what that bigger picture looks like, and they don't necessarily think, oh, if I automate this problem, I can solve this problem 6 months down the line, like automating my TypeScript definitions, for example. That's not something that a Brent would necessarily do. He will just go and fix those TypeScript definitions when they break each time round. But they have a strong sense of responsibility. So they feel like they're carrying the company on their shoulders, and they feel like they have to step in and fix things. The Brent would normally be the person that's on the end of the phone, when there's an outage, like fixing it on their computer. You don't really know what they're doing and how it's all kind of coming together and what's going to fix and bring the server up, and then magically your server's back up and everything's back to life. And then you have the Scrappy Do. So the Scrappy Do was a reflection on myself, and this is kind of where I arrived, myself on this journey. So the main thing about the Scrappy Do is that for me, it was, I'm highly confident in my ability, and I have a can-do attitude when I'm coming to solve problems, but I can tend to overpromise in an engineering capacity. And I think it's having that awareness that, for myself, that, I can kind of go, oh yeah, that's not a big problem, and I can oversimplify a problem, I can signpost that to my team. So when I'm kind of oversimplifying a problem to my team, they're going, oh, you're doing that again, and we can all naturally rein ourselves back in and work together. But one of the things about the Scrappy Do is that we're self-assured. So one of the things we have is that when somebody challenges us with that's not going to work, we've normally thought it through why something's not going to work, and we can articulate a very well reasoned why something will work, and that can feel quite confrontational in a work environment sometimes if somebody is like constantly coming back at you. But I think it's always very useful, because if I signpost that to people, they know, okay, this is not something to worry about. We can kind of balance that out a little bit. So when we circle back to ourselves, we can look at all these kind of different things that kind of make up developers. And the ones that I picked out, they are overly stereotypical. They're kind of quite shallow in some ways, but they kind of get us thinking about ourselves and how we work and how we interact in the work environment. And when we start to kind of think about those things, we can then start to kind of signpost them. We can ask ourselves questions, do we like frequent feedback, that we're on the right path? Have you ever wanted to be left alone to solve a problem? When we kind of think about these things, we can kind of, tell this to our managers and say, this is the direction we want to go in. So, this gives us empowerment. So, once we start to observe ourselves, we can understand our feelings. And then when we understand our feelings, we can then communicate our needs, because this is the key thing. It's about communicating our needs to our teams, to our managers, to our clients, in how we broker our requests. And then from needs, we can make requests. So I would like X, Y, Z, I like to do things like this, and this will kind of help us. So, according to Socrates, once we know ourselves, we may learn how to care for ourselves, but otherwise we never will. So, yeah. Well, in talk, thank you very much. Any questions?